Lucia Castaway's teacher here for our weekly episode. We are the 20th. Wow, what a journey till there. For today I wanted to talk about something that is quite close to my practice, and especially that it's not so well explicited by me, I have to say, or probably I give as a given that it is like that. I made a post on Instagram, not exactly a post, a story. I made a post on Facebook about a question that I did speak about with a lawyer, not because I wanted to talk with a lawyer, but because simply she's a friend and she works with my father. And she told me, aren't you into the line of some regulated professions as doctors or others, since you have results on vocal issues? Well, the thing that has been always central to me and very, very important, and maintain this very important point, is that no, I don't cross the line. I've never crossed this line, and I'm very, very careful not to cross it, because my expertise comes from training, from singing. I have a degree on that, I have a master on that, I have experience on that, and especially what I want to talk about today is functionality. What it means, functionality. The crossing line would be if I was working on the issues. Never worked on the issues. Never even have the idea that I could work on voice issues. And everything that I do and that I've done, and we are many doing into the functionality field, is something that is quite peculiar, and it is something that it has been developed in the last 20 years strategically before, as when I was teen and I was working with horses, yet there I was working on functionality. It is something that clearly it was in the times to be present and contemporary, and some like me were the adequate people to activate this kind of perspective. What my results are and what I'm presenting now is the fact that we can work on healthy function of the individual, and those healthy functions will not remain isolated. It has become a thought into movement, it has become a different kind and progress into biomechanical model. I'm the one putting the accent on, how can I say, small box, big box, being small box the vocal tract and the vocal system strictly, and the big box the body system. Especially it is an exception of skeletal muscle system, as I call it. That is not a musculoskeletal system, but I call it by myself in the other way, just to put the accent on the joints, on the segments, postural segments, and the activity of the muscles. I will read from some books, some text on vocal technique from 18th century until quite recent, the Michael Trimble, 2013 I think, I don't remember completely, but I will read it to be precise, and from functional books for athletes and training and some rehab. Functional means to understand how biomechanics work and applying that to training. When I say I've never worked on the issues, meaning that if there is an issue, yet it is a fragile situation, so I found more convenient, more interesting, more safe to work on similar functions in other segments of the body in some way related, to control, first to become functional. And what means functional? Perhaps it means something that you have not clearly an idea of what it is, or you think that a movement and some things are functional simply because they don't state themselves clearly as dysfunctional. And this is something that has become nuanced, sophisticated, and I'm getting more sophisticated into my thought and into my practice for voice, translating what they are finding and what I can understand they are finding into bridging with my expertise. And the results are not only still there, they are even more improved. Because we are just understanding better, and it was not that easy because it is quite a complex system. So, just to start. We start with what? Mancini, Practical Reflections on the Figurative Art of Singing, original in Italian, translated in English, and you find it. Nature, in her generosity of giving away her gifts, never puts them, save in rare exceptions, all in one person. So it seldom happens that we find one person gifted with all those harmonious conditions of vocal organs that form a perfect voice. It makes a difference into voice qualities, saying not one person has all, very rare that they have. The truth is that we find sometimes voices which are very strong and whose sound is vigorous, bright and liquid. They are qualities. Others are flexible and sweet. Then some voices have very wide range and are exceedingly sonorous, while others have small range but are admired because of the purity of tone, its evenness and color. We must initiate to this art, meaning singing, only those to whom nature has given a good voice backed by a natural musical intelligence, both qualities being absolutely necessary to ensure success. The end of the 18th century, end of 1700. This fact established that all voices come differently with different qualities yet, and not all together usually. It consequently follows that each fault in the voice requires a different remedy, to be applied according to the origin of the fault. And then we get to Francesco Lamperti, Guida teorico-pratica elementare per lo studio del canto, meaning guide, text, theoretical and practical on a basis level for the study of the singing. He is the father of Giambattista Lamperti. This has been published by Ricordi in 1864, so we are a little later. Something that he says is that very important thing, especially in the study of women, is that we have to develop the central notes, the medium register notes. And usually women have them very weak. In here, in the second page, you are going to see that he states that men have 2 registers, while women have 3. And this is something that now, not really in vocal technique, but I start having an idea of why of this idea of 3 register and the men 2 register, and especially that women had to develop the medium, so meaning that men had not that problem or that weakness, if you want. In the third page, that is the first page for him, he states that the voices that has to be trained are the voices that have yet, they present extension, equality, strength and flexibility. So he's even more stricter than Mancini previously. And that they need to be with a good ear. A good ear, that's of course pretty important. Then he says in this other page something quite of the epoch, and I will analyze that later, something that is quite important, meaning that if you have not the money or the possibilities to have good voice lessons, some kind of music will teach you. You remember when I said environment, when I said epigenetics, when I said perceptions? I repeatedly said, put yourself into conditions to do into your characteristic of voice, meaning if you are a soprano, do not study a repertoire of contralto just because you find it easier. But find strategies, functional strategies, to get to the soprano repertoire, even if it doesn't come out good enough yet. But do not adapt into something that you are not. First. Second, take some cover. Take some music made by some others. Take some music, some songs, or some repertoire made by some others you want to get close to. Some others in the same phase of career. It's difficult to say because if you don't yet sing, you don't find material now and you don't find material of the past, of course, but still the closest to your phase that you can find, and not when completely formed. And this is exactly what he is saying there. Some music, if you adapt to it and you cherish it and you try to do it as it is written and toward the intentions of the composer, will teach you. Yeah, it will teach you, absolutely. Then, the Four Voices of Man. We jump to Jerome Hines, for edition 1997, 1 century later. If you see here, vocal axioms, support appoggio revisited, tongue, jaw, lips, and alias, the larynx, placement and registers, the first voice, the second voice, the third voice, the fourth voice, the four voices as one, the lesson, choosing a teacher, general health and voice, vocal health and trauma, preservation of the mature voice, stage fright, the conductor and coach, the singing actor, the manager, the impresario, the critic, in conclusion. Why do I read that? Because we have made a jump with a discontinuity. In here we are treating many aspects of the singer. In the past it was, you have a voice or you don't have a voice. We train you, or no, sorry, you're losing time. In here we get more specific. On what? On many aspects of the voice, even the body and the health, because of course they count. The strategies, how to find a teacher, how to find another teacher, how to find what you haven't found yet. So we become less strict in what you must have, and we put the accent on what you can gain. And what he says in here, he says something very important. This book in the prefaces of Jerome Hines are always very interesting because they are very honest, they're very straight, and are quite close to our contemporary thinking about human capacity, human talent, human development, and what we want from us. And we don't want anymore to be stuck, blocked, unaccomplished by what was called nature. Now we call asset, now we call habits, now we call how your state has adapted into your life. So that if you know the ingredients, you can change the recipe. This book evolved out of the writing of Great Singers on Great Singing, a previous book of him. I was initially tempted to call what my teachers never taught me. Yeah, we are a bit like that. We look sometimes harsh, but when we are really in the phase of helping singers, we react to what does not work in them. So you see in us the reaction to help them, to correct them. So you see in us the pointing on what makes you eventually fail. Because we do not want you to fail. That's the thing. So we look harsh simply because we are helping not to fail people where they are not yet developed, meaning where they are failing some steps, so they need me, him, or anybody else that can help, and many can help. A title that was not intended as a put down for the teacher, but as a means of directing attention to a very real problem. This is something that in the past some of my students were a bit so unsure when I did tell them, I'm not all the cake, I'm a slice. Perhaps the most important in your face now, but I'm a slice. Then you have to take care of another slice, with another person, perhaps, with the music, perhaps, with yourself, perhaps, and then you're going to obtain the cake. But I'm a slice. A very important slice in some phases, a crucial slice in some phases as his teacher, but not all the cake. And it is not a problem. It's the reassurance that we work on slices, and then we get to a synthesis. And then we work on slices, and then we get to a synthesis, exactly as the chapters is clarifying. Many people have exaggerated expectations regarding the student-teacher relationship, and many people includes teachers as well as students. I had 3 teachers, each of whom was a great help to me, but no one of them had all the answers. Some problems I had to resolve by myself, absolutely. I do not buy the Svengali approach to teaching, in which the singer is just a piece of clay to be molded by the potter. Leave that to God. A student must actively take part in the creative process, with the teacher in charge, of course, but more about that later. So he points out something that is always more relevant now, is that we want to be respected as an individual. I want to get to the creative process, no matter if we are going to be amateur or professional. So the individual responsibility into the alliance with the master, as we used to call, or the teacher, as we usually call now, has profoundly changed. What he says is that in the past, yes, you had to absolutely do everything asked, never put how can I say, never ask a question, never think about the questions, just stay there and do exactly what he asks. It did work when we had to be functions into something very objective that was music, and then the master could bring us to a place of some different 0 point from which we did take charge. And we started taking charge. Now things have changed. Also because extreme ownership, Jacob Willink and Dave Babin, the comfort crisis, Michael Trimble, and the functionality. In the past, the thing was, if you have enough of the thing that I understand, I am going to train those. So, many people were not trained. Many people were discouraged. Eventually, in the good families, they used to learn singing, but they just did learn a bit. They couldn't have a good taste, but they were not trained into all the nuances and the access to true creative part if they did not show or they did not have in mind to really become professional and to really dedicate all their life to that. So what it means that something that is quite different from the other instrument is that our instrument is at the same time an instrument and a player. And the selection was done on the instrument. and a bit of intelligence of the player, and the capacity of the mind of the player to get not confused or stuck into all the complexities of music by not being able to stay into some cognitive dissonance that are always present when we get really high level singing. This comes from the fact that if you see the ingredients of our voice, biological, are all different systems in the body having different biological urgencies and hierarchies, yet we put some other kind of hierarchy and we use every single system as an ingredient of the instrument, not of the playing, before it's of the instrument, to have an instrument. What he's saying we don't want to be constricted anymore to what Lamperti or Mancini or all the others said in the past, because we have sufficient knowledge, will, adaptive responses, capacities to develop ourselves. That's why the teacher is not enough one to mold us completely, because we do want to do, ideally, or we want to have the door open to do what he has done. He said, I started with one voice, that is one way of thinking about the voice, and is one approach. Then I added others. To be a better musician, to have better fun, to have a better career. Just because we love to do that as human beings. To do that, we need what? That we involve ourselves and our responsibility. Extreme responsibility, Jocko Willink is talking about, is exactly the same thing. Is we have strategies and paths and ways to change how we respond to environment. But to have those strategies and to have the capacity to evolve and to change those responses, we must own ourselves. We must own what we are doing, the result of what happens, us plus the situation. And if you look at Jerome Hines' prefaces and talking, is in the way of saying, yeah, you take responsibility. Why? It's your freedom, it's your power, it's your capacity. And we get back to functionality. When I talk about now Michael Trimble, the great Michael Trimble, you find him on YouTube. Listen to him, learn from him. He's huge, he's fantastic. He's, from my side, so well and so hugely respected. Really, a great one, and a great master, and so generous as the great are, and as musicians very often are, and as Jerome Hines is. Fundamentals of a Great Vocal Technique, the Teachings of Michael Trimble, published 2013. And here we have forward introduction, Fundamentals of a Great Vocal Technique, insight into the biomechanics of great singing, posture, articulation, phonation and resonance, methods and techniques of famous singers, instigators, contrary motion, covering the tone, the posture method, Michael Trimble, Richard D. Renzi, Christopher Arnson. In the premise of this book, of course, there is no guarantee that we will be able to execute every note perfectly with every emission of the voice, no matter how correctly we learn to proper preparation and approach to the art of singing. The greatest archers do not hit the bull's eye with every arrow, and the pitchers does not throw a perfect strike with every pitch. Even the great tenor Enrico Caruso, and again if you don't know him, get to listen to him, sang tones that were not his best at times. Indeed, in the beginning of his career, he was known as the glass tenor because he cracked so often. However, a certain degree of expectation must be fulfilled if you are to become professional of anything. We must be able to stand and deliver over and over again on a regular, dependable basis. There must be a methodical approach, developed through repetitive thought and action, right thinking, right doing, which allows us to fulfill the criteria of our profession, right being, under many different conditions. So, he says that he's very interested in biomechanics because he wants to find a path that is logic clear, to find a voice and to find what he was saying. And here comes my functional thinking. So I added what? I added what was usually called as breath management or posture management into more specific, fractioning it into what was the great functional movement. That was fun because it happened to me to looking for this while others were looking for those in parallel without knowing each other. And I laughed as a crazy first time that I saw some of the exercises of those that were exactly the same I was doing and asking. To start understanding what we are talking about when we talk about functionality and where the functional movement has started. It has started since you wanted to do better with what you have. You want to understand better. You want to improve your students, not only yourself. And if you look at those books, they're all functional. And Matthias Alexander was the first putting something that was completely counterintuitive into the thinking. I just took, not from him, but from another point of view, finding what I'm talking about into the conferences that I will not disclose here because it's for the conferences. So, not yet, after them. And it is the fact that if I take those in parallel with which we found a similar thing, I'm not saying that I have the same outcome they have, of course. Everybody has his outcome and his results, and it's not a competition on, but the thought and the path is exactly the same. So we come to Michael Boyle, New Functional Training for Sports. It is the new edition that I have, the second 2016, but the first edition in 2003, 20 years ago. The thing is, when he talks about functionality, he says terms such as sport specific, for us style specific, which implies that certain movements and movement patterns are specific to individual sports, have been used to describe some functional training concepts. But sport-specific training takes place with the athlete on the mat, field or court, whereas in strength and conditioning, that is what I do for voice, we work to get the athlete stronger and to improve specific conditioning. Indeed, functional training may be more accurately represented by the term sports general training. Exactly where I put myself, where my work is put, meaning the instrument, how it is built, its possibilities, not its yet capacities, but what the body can instrument at that moment train on and get to be sport specific. Sometimes we do to improve a sport specific person, sometimes I do to just have the person getting to be able to train and to get sport specific. What is important to understand is that in that we have to train functionally. What it means functionally? It means that it is the anatomy of the living human being. Doing something very specific in the sport or in the style, but at the same time having to remain healthy with its integrity and its logics inside. And if the first phase was to assess, as you see here in Grey Cook, that I have again, that is quite important, where is it? It is here that he analyzes some insufficiencies, because he does functional movement system screening, assessment and corrective strategies, because he's a chiropractor. So he had to do part of the work that I do is, okay, you wouldn't like to sing, but nowadays is able to help you because they really don't know how simply to put this instrument to be an instrument. In my experience has been with people not finding answers with doctors, and they were the doctors sent it to me. I've never done without the assessment and the yes, you can do that of the doctor. And as I said, I never worked on the issues. I found another path. Also because it's useless to work on the issue. You're going to strain even more. You have to work around the issue, where you have healthy tissues, and work on the patterns, because the brain and the body go by patterns, and using those and voice is just some complex patterns, working the one with the other in a very complex way and very sophisticated way. That's why it's also so fascinating, that we have to understand how to target those to solve, to help the system. By helping the system, well, the issues disappear. They simply disappear. And this is something. The second step is Michael Bolt's step, and is also in my practice, is also in your practice as a singer, or as a trainer, or as a teacher, or simply as a professional who wants to get far in their artistry. And it is, how can I work on those that is specific to every human being as a voice? And in this there is also the misunderstanding, if I can say like that, of the register by Lamperti. Because when we study biomechanics, and the knowledge is going further and further, that's fantastic, we see that there are some gender-specific things that could explain what he found. But it's not the register in themselves, it's the capacity of the system to activate before or later the co-activated system. And then we get to one cited by Michael Boy, that is Gary Gray, that he says, function doesn't occur from a static position. A combination of joint motions create opposite movement that helps us achieve the action we set out to do. It might seem like we don't need these extra movements, but this opposite movement is a critical component of successful function. Some of my students know that I point that out all the time. I make them find it, and then I make them fix it, then I make them want it, and then I ask them to relate to them and maintain them. The opposite movement lengthens and loads the muscles, getting them ready to complete the action and then transforming the energy into movement. We load to explode as a spring-like energy. To jump up, we go down. To throw forward, we reach back. There we've gone where I am in my very little comprehension of biomechanics, but the bridging thing is the important thing, because I have an expertise in singing and I have an expertise in Belcanto, and I started having expertise in other styles since I worked with voices of every style from the instrumental point of view, not the stylistic precise. So precise, I live to the other. I'm a slice, they have their slice, and it's okay. Not only it's okay, it's optimal, like that. So there are the terms in which I think I express myself now, and we start seeing things. If you add to this knees over toes guy, we are using functionality to do what? Here, to optimize the outcome by understanding what lacks in some, because they didn't realize that, or that it lacks in some movement. knees over toes guy, and it is again part of my work. This of this kind you find in some styles technique. You find in Belcanto. It is not said in those terms, but it's said in practice. Because the techniques, the historical, successful techniques, are functional techniques, of course. That is what Michael Trimble says all the time. He says, we don't have to understand some things because those practices bring us there, and they are yet proven, and is absolutely right. I am making the effort to put in terms in which we are going to make an alliance with science, because knowledge is that. We have found those historical practices, and then we are going to embrace into the knowledge, but it can take time. And in the time that it takes, it is useless to lose them, because they are yet there, and they are of course absolutely proven, because they are functional in themselves. They have taken away what was dysfunctional. And the very good ones, as Michael Trimble or Jerome Hines, they point out the functional part, useful, and they point out how to remain functional and how not to get in trouble. By what? By sometimes we want to do too much, and we do not want to recognize what the structure is telling us, because even if now we are at those terms in functionality, we don't know everything. We don't have the answers for everything, and probably we will never have all the answers. So we must maintain the capacity of putting boundaries where our not understanding clashes with our structure and our possibility of training. And there it is, okay, I let it be like that, and I stop myself in pushing because I'm going into trouble. And we get respectful of ourselves, our style, and we find other ways. That's how I found my cossumethod, by not working on the issues. Why? Because again, it would have been a great abuser, and I would have been really dangerous. It's not my work, it's the doctor's work. My work is to find ways of not getting into the issues and having the system working with a voice, because the issues, they are not overall issues. There is always something good on which you can work and improve. And this, you will see what it does improve. It gets be not an issue anymore. And then you go further. The other thing that I was doing where I was specialized is something that knees over toes guys is explicitly now for body overall, and it is the capacity of the system by itself, of the body, to repair and heal itself. And part of the functionality is now to get to provoke by exercises, by training, by practices, this healing capacity. And this is exactly what you find in my first case on YouTube, also on the second, also on the third. The third was more, I'm going to say, tricky, because simply there was an organic damage into the capacity of re-establish the vibration of the cord. But since we know that fascia and other tissues can regenerate if you provoke the same movement without trauma, it happened that. Okay? So the thing with functionality is what? Is that function is not only what you feel, not creating damage. It has very precise terms. And those terms we are learning, finding, teaching, and stating and controlling with studies and developing to each other. It's so new as concept that it is not so intuitive to keep. And the second thing is functionality gives us the possibility to take extreme responsibility of ourselves and get to be the one with a voice and singing, or with knees over toes guy to be one jumping without crushing himself. Why? Because he wants to, he likes to do. it is important to him. So this thing of functionality is not just in stylistic technique. It is a very powerful tool to maintain, develop the instrument, heal and avoid the adaptations and the overuse of your style, of your singing and age related, and to have a logic into how use and adapt other stylistic technique to add to yourself. Of course, as I said, it has not all the answers, but it's quite phenomenal. But it's a new way of thinking, pretty well established now, and that's why I put a lot of those things. And go see them, it's quite interesting, and the body is the same. But this is for the conferences, the specifics. Another recap. See you next week.